You are now tuning in to the Going North podcast with your host, best-selling author, professional speaker, and member of the John Maxwell team, Dominic Dom Brightman. And every Monday and Thursday, we're going to hear the voice of a different author sharing their gifts, stories, and expertise to help you charge forward in life. Now let's get on with the show. And today on the Going North podcast, we're bringing some fabulous humans from across the globe. Today is no different. We got one heck of a guest for today, my friends. This guy right here, mental health and substance abuse recovery speaker, as well as a coach and advocate. And he's also a fellow podcast host, a host of the Choose Your Struggle podcast in a country where as many as 1 in 2 will struggle with an issue of mental health of substance abuse at some point in their life. And you got to imagine it's crazy because like the average American is still underserved by an outdated model of care. It's like, dude, like really? Like this is America, y'all. And going down the line, like this guy right here has a person with 10 years in recovery who survived multiple suicide attempts and an overdose. This guy fights to end that stigma by telling a story of recovery and advocating for opportunities for others to do the same. So let's give it up for the J himself, not the doctor, but Mr. J Shifman. How you doing today, sir?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. And you know what? That's the first time that I've ever been compared to Dr. J, and it's probably going to be the last. He's got about 1.5 feet on me, I think. So.
Yeah. I usually bring out comparisons out of the thin air. I don't know where the hell they come from, but yeah. Welcome to the show, man.
Well, I appreciate it, and it's really fun to be here. This is something that I'm very passionate about, is talking about these issues, and so any opportunity I can, but especially with cool hosts like yourself, that makes it all the better. So Dominic, I really appreciate you having me, man.
Woohoo! Great to have you on, my man. Great to have you on. So, as with all introductions, you know they're not allowed to be 75 days long and 5 minutes. So, mind filling in some cavities I missed about the wonderful Jay himself?
Yeah, well, you hit the high points, or should I say the low points. I am, like you said, I am 10 years in recovery, and that really is what motivates a lot of what I do. So in my early 20s, I did survive as I said in the interview, or in the introduction, to self attempts on my life and an overdose. I spent 10 days in a lockdown facility, and 3 weeks in a lockdown facility and 3 months in a long-term care facility. Finally entered recovery after all of that, and it really motivated me to recognize a lot. It sort of opened my eyes in this world. And, as we were saying, look, this is America. People shouldn't be, struggling to get the help that they deserve. But unfortunately, around these issues, there still is an enormous stigma that keeps people from even seeking help. And if they do, a lot of that help is very outdated in terms of the model of care. So, it is the kind of thing where those of us who have lived through it need to tell our stories, because it's hard to put your own stigma on something that has a face. It's really easy to hate on people on the internet, to hate on people, that you don't really know. But when you hear those stories, when you actually connect with somebody who has lived through something that you haven't, it just hits you different, and it helps you understand the situation better.
There we go. Better and not butter. And it's so true. Like, I guess it's pride. You think that might be the main reason why people don't seek help in the first place? Even after you seek the help, you may not get the correct type of help that you need.
Well, pride is a huge part of it. Unfortunately, you're deadly right that people feel that they can do this themselves, or they don't actually, I may be struggling, but I'm not like those people. So that's definitely part of it. The other part is fear. Look, the biggest tool for people who are struggling with some sort of a substance misuse issue is AA, and anonymous is literally in the name. And that teaches us that you should stay anonymous, that this is something that you should hide, that you shouldn't even tell people that you're, that's one of their rules. You don't talk about what's going on in the room. That may have been the case 100 years ago when AA started. That is incredibly outdated, incredibly dangerous today. We need people to know that they can speak up, that they can be themselves in this this world. I always tell the story. My aunt, unfortunately, is struggling with cancer right now, and she's going through chemo. And, you know, I was talking to my grandmother, who I love very much, and she was saying how brave my aunt is for fighting what she's fighting. I said, of course she is. And she said, you know, but you're brave too for telling your story. And I said, Grandma, why is it that my aunt is brave for going through it and I'm brave for talking about it? Why are those two things separate like that? And that's that stigma at play, right? Just talking about struggling with these issues is seen as brave, but fighting something like cancer is seen as brave in a different scenario.
Yeah, it's so true because I mean, and it really sucks that cancer is running so rampant nowadays, and that's probably a whole nother podcast from all the crap they put in the food nowadays. But yeah, man, it's really interesting too because I've never even heard from that side before about Alcoholics Anonymous. Because when I hear that, it's like, oh, okay, it's a safe place where folks is like you can be anonymous, you have a place where you can speak up in the meeting, but after hearing the description, like, oh shoot, it's like Fight Club. No one speaks about Fight Club. Like AA, like no one speaks about Alcoholics Anonymous. Don't tell them what group we're in. Don't tell them nothing.
Yep.
But it's like, yeah, there's that other piece where you just think about it from a different perspective. It's like, yeah, don't tell anybody. Well, to be honest, really, I mean, yeah, there's some things where people don't have to know or don't need to know, but like there's still some pieces where it's like it's okay. Just say biggest part of the problem is knowing that you have that problem and admitting it and coming out with it. And you don't have to do it on a massive scale in the beginning,
Sure.
but just really just taking that first leap. So what helped you to take that first leap?
Well, you're making a really fantastic point. I want to underscore that. It took me 5 years of being in recovery to start talking about it openly. So I 100% understand exactly what you said. It's not like you enter recovery and people want you to get up on stage and immediately start talking about it. That's not at all the case, but you need to be able to feel that this isn't something I should be ashamed of. And that's where I was for the first 5 years. It took two people in my life to really help me get over that. Number one, I got a buddy. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I have a buddy in Cincinnati who runs an organization. It's a storytelling event where he gets influential or well-known Cincinnatians to tell their origin story on stage. And he asked me 3 times to do this, and I kept saying no, not going to happen, not going to happen. And finally, one day, I was at home having dinner with my parents, and I remember this moment. You know, I can picture this moment still. I'm talking to my dad. He's standing there holding the New York Times. He's reading the paper, and I'm telling him about this opportunity, you know, to tell my story. And it wasn't even that he was like, you know, woke on this issue, right? But when I said to him, you know, I don't think I'm going to do it, he said, why wouldn't you do this? And I said, well, I'm scared. And he lowers the paper, he looks right at me and goes, fear is never a good reason not to do something. And then picks back up the paper as if he didn't realize he just blew up my world, right? So the next day I called my buddy. I was like, ask me again. And he did, and I told the story, and really, my life changed that night.
Yeah, powerful right there. If I'm not mistaken, what was it? That fear shouldn't stop you from...
Fear is never a good reason not to do something. And it's 100% true, man, because everything I was scared of that night when I told my story, even the moment I got off stage and everybody was clapping, I still was like, well, that's it. You know, all my friends are going to leave me now that they know this shameful secret. Could not be farther from the truth. Everybody rushed over me, gave me a hug, and was so proud of me. And it was the exact opposite of what I feared was going to happen. And it's because we create all this anxiety in our minds about these horrible things that could happen to us, when in reality, yeah, it may happen. Sure, anything could happen. But the likelihood of that happening is very slim.
Yeah, and it's so darn true. And it shows that you had some good people around you that were actually genuine, because there may be a percentage of people it's like, oh, they're an abuser, they're a user, whatever, and it'd be like, don't go near them, avoid them like the plague, they got the leprosy. But it's like, no, not really. That may be a sign that you need to get around different people that'll actually encourage you. And heck, even that moment right there probably shows you like, hey, I got some real people with me. And that's probably one of the major things that folks need to realize, like, hey, this may be an opportunity to see who really actually truly cares about me. And that's
100%.
really what it is.
Yeah, and you put that so perfectly. And I do want to make sure we do highlight that you are 100% right. There are people with some very outdated views on issues of mental health and substance misuse. The thing is, I was actually asked this in an interview 2 or 3 days ago. Are you mad when somebody comes at you with that stigma, with those outdated views? And I say, no, I'm not mad. We've been taught that as a culture forever. And we're still being taught that, right? I mean, when something terrible happens to a person, when a policeman, when they're involved in a police shooting or whatever the case is, I guarantee you within 24 hours, some form of, oh, he was using drugs or whatever is going to come out, because that is always used as a reason why the person deserved to be killed. There's not a drug on this planet that is worthy of that person being executed, and yet we've accepted that if they're a drug user, then we can explain away their murder. Oh, they were using drugs. That is the sort of warped thinking that isn't that person's fault that they're even saying this. They've had this deeply ingrained in them by our culture, by our political leaders, by our society, that drugs and drug users are always bad. And yet people who drink alcohol, which is a drug, and in fact is one of the deadliest drugs that we have, that's a celebrated thing. Now that marijuana is being legalized, cannabis research is everywhere. Cannabis is being celebrated. But 10 years ago, if you smoked cannabis, you were a druggie and you were all this ridiculous stuff. So it shows you that all of this is built on nothing. It's just mirages that we've been taught our entire lives.
Mirages we've been taught our entire lives. My goodness. So this is good. I knew we were saying hump day for a reason in the US of A. We've been looking for them, and we've been taught about mirages.
Yeah.
You're looking for all that oases that may not be an oasis after all.
Well put.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And like, it's so darn true about the whole drug. It's like, if someone uses drugs, like, that doesn't mean they need to be killed. Like, that makes no sense. It's like it, and to be honest, there may be some drugs out there, I'm not saying good or bad, like cannabis, that may be actually good for certain possibilities. Like, hey, like cannabis, it's usually good for the eyes if you have glaucoma or whatever. And then, of course, Joe Rogan with the DMT. I don't plan on taking DMT. To be honest, it's way out there for me. And the ayahuasca that has to be administered in a certain place outside of the U.S. by some folks who have robes or whatever. It's like there's interesting stuff out there, but it doesn't mean you need to kill somebody. It just shows that they were curious about something.
Yep. Yeah, and when you say it that way, it sounds ridiculous, and yet that's exactly what people are saying when, that person was using drugs. And on your point about DMT, I've used every drug on this planet besides heroin and meth. Those are the only two that I did not use. And I can tell you from personal experience, again, I live this, so this is not just me doing research. All of these drugs can be used safely. All of them can also be used very unsafely. And I was it's a spectrum, and I was on every point of that spectrum. I did use DMT. I had some of the most mind-opening events of my life on DMT. I love this idea that we're now trying to legalize psilocybin magic mushrooms, because those can be used in very sort of religious ways. But I also think that the idea that we should just lock all these things up and throw away the key is also ridiculous. Exactly what you said about cannabis. That's how they used to think about marijuana. And now here we are, where a majority of states have legalized it. That wouldn't be possible if our ideas about the evolutions of what is allowable in our society hadn't changed. So we need to be willing to open our minds and be thoughtful, be mindful, and be understanding when people are pushing us outside of these boxes.
That's right. That's right indeed. And it's so darn true. And for those who may be going through that time where they're now recovering and that they're trying to recover from their curiosity stage, I think I was probably going to call it out, curiosity stage. Like, what's probably helped you the most besides that because you mentioned how it took you 5 years to start speaking up and speaking out about it. Like, what helped you in those 5 years to keep going? Because there may be somebody listening right now that may be going through that struggle right now with that addiction or something like that.
Definitely. So number one, the most important thing for me was having the support system in place. You know, I went through detox in my grandparents' home, a different grandmother than I mentioned before, and she allowed me to go through the worst, you know, couple of months of my life on her guest bed. So having that support system was huge. After that, it was sort of I preach the idea of choose your struggle. That's my personal mantra. It's my hashtag. It's the name of my business, name of my podcast, all that kind of stuff. And what that means is essentially making sure that every day you're getting up and following your own definitions of success, following your own goals. You know, we, as I've said before, we live in a society that likes to ascribe a lot to our lives, and in reality, not all of it's that healthy. So making sure that you are following your own path is the number one tip I can give anybody. You know, don't be doing this for somebody else, because we only get one of these that we know of. As we love to say about 10 years ago, YOLO. You know, if you're doing this for somebody else, you're not going to find that fulfillment. You're just not, because it's not your own dreams. It's not your own measures that you're going to find success in. So make sure you're going after what you want to go after.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Because like there's the school of thought where it's like, hey, if it's something bigger than you, you should probably do it. But if you're taking drugs for somebody else, then that's a bad idea. Like this is the one time where that one idea, that powerful idea, works in reverse. Like, come on, you got to really keep yourself in mind here. Like that, that's probably one of the main reasons why mental health and self-care are huge topics nowadays, because of really not only folks may be recovering from drug addictions and drug use, but also probably just the fact that folks are just working themselves into the darn dirt with nothing to show for it.
100%. And you know, we in the US, for whatever reason, have decided that this idea of, you know, you work for the weekend, you work the same, like our parents used to work the same job until they were 65. They would retire with the handshake and the watch, and then we'd go on to the golden years, when in reality, none of us is guaranteed that, right? And so you get all these boomers who are like, oh, the millennials won't stick with a job. Well, we're just going to keep looking until we find something we're happy with, right? Because why would we keep working at a job that treats us like shit, that thinks we're just a cog in a wheel, when in reality, we're spending just as many waking hours at that job as we are at home with our families? That doesn't make any sense. So boomers, y'all can complain about us, you know, lazy millennials all you want. We're going to find a way to be happier than y'all were. And quite frankly, you guys kind of screwed up this country anyway, so we're taking it back.
Yeah, amen to that, because it's so darn true, where it's like you see it go on the television and it's like, oh, the millennials, oh, they're ruining everything. Well, not really. Like they're putting the wrong ones out there. There's still a lot of millennials kicking lots of arse out there and really becoming millionaires first time in their whole darn family. So,
Yep.
and funny enough, like a few generations down the road, they're going to be blaming us millennials, whatever they're going to call them. So we're just going to keep kicking the metaphorical can down the road anyway. So,
yep. You know, it's 100% true. I mean, the older generations always blame the younger ones. The difference is, for the first time ever in the history of this country, our generation is not projected to be wealthier than the generation above us. And it's because we have had all these terrible things distilled in us. And quite frankly, the boomers have put this country on the wrong path. And so you get all these people who want to complain about millennials, and then they're not doing good things for us anyway. So, you know, I love my parents. I love a lot of people in the generation above us. But quite frankly, at the end of the day, I'm going to do what's best for me in the future. I'm not going to follow these senseless ideas that have been passed on to us, that a lot of which don't have any basis in reality.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And that's what we need, is stuff that's really based in reality, because it's good to really have at least a good picture in your mind of like really pitching something in the future. But hey, it's still got to come out in reality, because this is real life. It's like it's not like you got a bunch of lives left and the magic mushrooms that may shrink you and you can still keep going. It's like, nah, man, you got to actually keep going here. This is the one life you have to live in this form anyway. So
man, I
keep that going.
I wish our lives were more like Mario. You know, we would have 4 or 5 extra ones. You know what? I'm not feeling this one. Let me try this over again with a different life.
Exactly. Exactly. So, since this is far from your first rodeo, metaphorically speaking, from a podcast interviewer perspective, is there a question or a topic you wish you'd be asked about more often that you don't get to talk about a lot?
Oh man, that's a great question. I've been on so many of these now that you know, I will say this, right? There's always one message that I make sure I give out every time I speak, whether it's on stage or on a podcast, whatever the case is in an interview, and that is number one, first and foremost, if you're listening and you're struggling, reach out. There is somebody in your life that will listen, whether it's Dominique or myself. You can find us online. I have people in my inbox every day just going, "Hey, I heard you on a podcast, or I read about you in this interview. I kind of just need someone to talk to." I'm here. It's not about money. I'm not making money off it. I just want to help these people because I've been there and I didn't reach out, and I know what happens when you don't. And that is, again, I attempted suicide twice and I overdosed, and I'm lucky to be alive. So we have a saying in this business: we would rather spend 2 hours talking to you today than 2 hours attending your funeral tomorrow. Please reach out. There are people in your life that will be there for you, even if you don't think that's the case.
There you go. There you go. That's right. 2 hours of talking as opposed to 2 hours of crying at a funeral. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. Yeah, this ain't the good time to die. This is not the
No.
good time to die. And it's never a good time, but this time especially when the whole family that wants to attend can't attend. So
Yeah.
definitely keep your head up.
Man, I'll tell you what, back in March, right when this really started, right, my grandfather passed away. And,
Mm.
it was really tough. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. My family's in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we couldn't get back there to be with him. And I was really upset about it. And then they had to cancel the funeral because this was like the second week of March when all of a sudden everything was panicking. And
Hmm.
seeing what my grandmother had to go through, not even being able to hold a memorial for her husband of 65 years. If you think that your family would rather go through that right now than spend a couple hours just sitting with you as you're struggling, I don't know I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, from living through it myself, both on the other end of being that person and also now seeing what this did to my grandmother. Like, I just, you're wrong. You're just flat out wrong. People will be there right now more than, as you perfectly said, there's never a good time. Right now especially, please reach out because it's just, people want to help you. Nobody should have to go through what my grandmother did, not being able to mourn her husband of 65 years.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Because that's definitely a long life and it has to be celebrated, but it's even worse when you can't celebrate it. So, since my man is moving and shaking, what's next for Jay? What's next for Jay?
Well, before COVID, like, let's go back to, what was that, 30 years ago before COVID started.
Yeah, yeah,
I
less
I
facial hair and
was
everything.
basically, I mean, at this point, man, I'll be talking to someone and I'll be like, who knows at this point? Like, we've been in this thing for 3 years. Who knows? So last year, I started writing a book, and it was all about the people who are on the front lines, who are doing incredible work, that are making real change in the fight against issues of mental health and substance misuse. And I got about 4 interviews in. My goal was 12, and then COVID hit. And as I was saying to Dominique before we started recording this, on these topics, doing a Zoom conversation is great, and I love doing this, but a lot of what is said is sort of visual. It's not the words coming out of your mouth, right? It's sitting with someone as they talk about this incredibly difficult work, and going with them and seeing them do this. And that was going to be a big part of this. So obviously that can't happen because of COVID. So I put the book on hold, and my goal is to pick it up again, hopefully in 2021. But at this point, who really knows? It could be 2022. That's still a goal of mine down the road. I've been very lucky. Back in February, before it really hit, but when it started to look like, okay, the COVID's going to be what we think it's going to be, I started a podcast, and I did so after my best friend since I was in middle school, is a comedian by the name of Spark Tabor, started one as well called Cookies for Breakfast. And it's a very funny podcast. But I said to him, like, dude, if you can do this, like, I love you, but if you can do this, I can do this. You know what I mean? So I started my own podcast called Choose Your Struggle, after my brand. and it's talking about these issues, and it's essentially doing what I was already doing on stage. That was my day job before all this. I was a public speaker, taking all of that and putting that in podcast form. So getting people to have these difficult conversations, trying to end the stigma around these issues, one podcast interview at a time. And I interview everyday people and industry leaders about these topics, and I put out a podcast a week. And it's been incredibly rewarding. It's a labor of love, as you and I were talking, one podcaster to another. It's a lot of work. But, you know, when somebody calls me afterwards, or somebody texts me, or somebody, like I said, emails me, it's like, hey, you know, I heard that you're just willing to talk to somebody. All those hours of work are worth it right there. That makes the whole thing worth it. And I always come back to this one Eminem line. He said, if one kid out of 100 million is going through a struggle and feels that he can relate, that's great. That's my mantra. If I can get one person, I've done my duty, and it's all worth it.
Wow, there we go. There we go, right there. There we go. So check out that podcast, Choose Your Struggle. That's right. Choose your struggle, folks. That's right. That's right. Make sure it's one that you can come out of alive, hopefully.
100%. Look, I want to go back to that quote, and I say this sometimes because fear is never a good reason not to do something is true about 90% of the time. Not always. There are certain circumstances where fear is a very good reason not to do something. I've been skydiving. I loved it. I did it before. I'm now married, and you know, I wouldn't go skydiving today as much as to me, it was the most religious moment of my life when you come out of a plane and you see the world the way you do when you go skydiving. That being said, I love my wife way more than I love skydiving, and I wouldn't go skydiving again just in case I was that one out of 100, you know, million or whatever that didn't make it skydiving. So not saying there aren't perfectly good reasons not to listen to that fear. I'm just saying most of the time that fear that's in your head is not going to come true.
Ah, good, good, good. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. That's right. So make sure you jump out the toy plane, and it's only 5 feet, and make sure you have a life jacket.
That's right.
Land in that water. That's right. Oh, man. Well, that's what I'm talking about. Well, we're coming down to the magical question that every guest gets to receive, and that is if you're to wake up tomorrow and you're 25 again, but this time in 2020 with no pandemic and all of your amassed knowledge and experience, what advice would you give to yourself?
Well, at 25, I was 1 year into recovery, and so that was a very interesting and tough time of my life. I would say, and I love this quote. If you're an NBA fan, you're going to recognize this, but trust the process. You know, it basically, for those of you who are not familiar, that was the whole goal around the Philadelphia 76ers rebuild. As a Boston Celtics fan, I'm kind of happy it didn't work out, but that's a different story. But to be fair, the idea is a good one, and that is essentially, don't get hung up on what's going to work for you today, because in reality, the most influential decisions of our life, we won't know until probably 5, 10, 15 years later. So trust that process. Do what you think is right. Don't worry so much about what's going to make a difference today or tomorrow. Worry what's going to make a difference down the road. And you know, again, I learned that the hard way. There was a study done not long ago in which they found that the average person, when asked to think about the future, can think about 7 to 8 years into the future with some good enough realistic ideas of what that future is going to look like. The average person struggling with addiction, 2 weeks. 2 weeks is the longest they can think into the future, because your brain has transformed. And the only thing that matters to you in reality, and again, I live this, is making sure you can get that next hit, that next whatever, and trying to avoid withdrawals. And so that changes the way you think. And I had to relearn how to think into the future, you know? And it's why now when I'm doing all this, I don't get hung up on, okay, well, that podcast episode didn't do so well, or my numbers. I don't really even look at the numbers. What matters to me is if I'm building something, if I'm doing what I think is the right thing to do, and I'm having an impact, and I'm thinking much more long term. So again, trust that process.
Yeah, that's right. Trust that process indeed. That's right. Due process, as some say. That's right. Trust that process. That's right. That's what the pros do. They go through the process and they trust it. That's what I'm talking about. Yes, indeed. So for those who want to keep in magical contact with the drug slammer, Grandmaster Jay himself, baby, Jay Shifman, what's the best way for folks to reach out to you?
Yep, you can find me on my website, jayshifman.com, JAYSHIFMAN.com. You can find me on social media. All of your social medias, I'm either Jay Shifman or my business name, Choose Your Struggle. Reach out to me. And if you want to listen to the Choose Your Struggle podcast, you can get that anywhere you get your podcast.
Woo! There you have it, folks. Check out Jay and all of his wonderful wares. Check out that Choose Your Struggle podcast. He's got a bunch of ratings, I believe 156 ratings. So a lot of folks have been tuning in and watching and listening to the goodness that Jay is bringing out for folks. So be on the lookout for that. Give it a listen. Give it multiple listens. And if you're struggling, it doesn't have to be forever. Reach out to somebody. Talk to somebody.
That's right. 100%. I appreciate you saying that.
Yes, indeed. So any parting words to the folks still listening, Jay?
Well, I appreciate you having me. It's always great to talk about these issues, especially with someone who is such a cool, laid-back host as yourself, man. So thank you so much for having me. And again, listeners, someone's there. Reach out to Dami. He's a cool dude. He'll listen. He'll probably give you some good advice too. Reach out to me. Reach out to somebody. And also, if somebody else in your life is struggling, do the same thing for them. Tell them, look, I'll just come over. Let's play some video games. Let's do whatever. Let's listen to some music. We don't even have to talk. Let's just hang out. And in that way, I'm going to be there for you, because usually the person doesn't actually want to talk about it in that moment. They just want to know that somebody is there for them. So that's the biggest thing. Jump on Zoom, just chill with them for a little bit, get on PS4, whatever you got to do to just be there for somebody.
How's it going, you super special, awesome human? Since you made it to the end of this episode, it looks like you really enjoyed yourself. Since you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with at least 3 people in your network and tell them what you really liked about this episode. Heck, even shoot myself or the guest an email and let them know what you liked most about this interview, so that way they can stay inspired to keep pushing out great work.